Hello and welcome to $5 Hockey Mask. If you've been here before, welcome back. Civil wars rarely end peacefully. Sure, the government might reach an agreement with the major rebel groups to end their hostilities, but there will still be lingering unrest within the population that post-war leaders need to do their best to quell without heightening tensions too much. Unless you're this guy, then you just do everything you can to make people mad. Pierre Nkurunziza was president of Burundi from 2005 until his resignation in 2020. In 1993, a civil war broke out in Burundi between various ethnic Hutu rebel groups and the mostly ethnic Tutsi military. Hutu-Tutsi tensions are pretty complicated, but the basic rundown is that the Hutu majority had been subjugated by the Tutsi minority for centuries. Tensions between the two groups eventually boiled over into an all-out race war in 93 when Hutu extremists assassinated the Tutsi president. Unlike a lot of the other guys on my list, Nkurunziza wasn't particularly politically active, even when the war broke out. He wasn't a military officer or the president's son or anything. Guy was a high school teacher who did university lectures on the side. So, what happened? Well, 2 years into the war, the Burundian army attacked the university he was teaching at, killing 200 Hutu civilians as retaliation for attacks by rebel groups. As you might expect, almost getting murdered by the military for no reason might have changed his stance on the conflict a little bit, and he joined the Forces for the Defense of Democracy, or FDD branch, of the National Council for the Defense of Democracy, or CNDD, one of the Hutu rebel factions. He rose up the CNDD-FDD's ranks and became its leader in the year 2000, eventually bringing the group to a ceasefire with the government 3 years later. Along with granting Nkurunziza amnesty for his war crimes, the agreement allowed the CNDD-FDD to register as a political party. After the war ended in 2005, the party ran in that year's elections, and Nkurunziza was voted in by the parliament. Even though he wasn't elected by the people, Nkurunziza was pretty popular at first. In the first few years of his presidency, he made maternity care and primary education free and initiated peace talks with some remaining rebel groups to help stabilize the country. He also took some steps towards fixing the economic issues caused by the civil war, bringing Burundi into economic alliances and trade organizations and raising billions of dollars in foreign aid to improve infrastructure. But this popularity didn't last. His first term hadn't even ended when he got started on his dictator stuff, having journalists arrested without charge and suspected militant holdouts rounded up and executed without making sure they were actually militant holdouts. He'd also formed a youth militia called the Imbonerakure to crack down on dissent more efficiently. Imbonerakure is a Kirundi term meaning those who see from afar. Fitting name since they were basically a budget mass surveillance system. Instead of spyware and wiretaps, Nkurunziza used these guys to track down and deal with potential dissenters. They would follow people around and keep tabs on them and set up roadblocks to randomly search cars. Anyone they thought might have been up to something would be kidnapped, tortured, and sometimes not executed. He didn't leave all the political repression to the Imbonerakure, though. In 2014, he banned jogging, since he figured dissidents could use it as a cover to secretly organize. 2 years later, he made it illegal to ride a motorcycle in the capital city, worried that insurgents could use them as tools to overthrow him. He also vehemently denied all accusations of human rights abuses, but refused every chance he got to prove his innocence. In 2016, the UN Human Rights Council opened an investigation into his policies, which he refused to cooperate with. The ICC did the same thing the next year, and as a Rome Statute signatory, his government was legally obliged to help out with the investigation. He withdrew Burundi from the organization 2 days later. Corruption was also rampant in his government, and a good chunk of the money he was supposed to put towards those reforms he promised went to his officials instead. I said he took steps towards fixing the economy, not that he actually did. It actually got worse under his leadership. A lot worse. Like almost 3/4 of the population ending up under the poverty line by the end of his presidency, levels of worse. Anyway, elections that the people could actually vote in were held in 2010, and he was re-elected with just under 92%. As you might have gathered from that number, this election was still about as fair as the first one. Allegations of electoral fraud and persistent threats from Nkurunziza's administration pushed all major opposition parties to withdraw their candidacy out of protest and/or fear. This effectively left him as the only candidate, so it's no surprise he won. Okay, so he wasn't elected for his first term, and allegedly rigged the election for his second term. The only way to one-up that would have been to illegally run for a third one, but that's just ridiculous. In April of 2015, he announced his candidacy for a third term, even though the country's constitution said he could only run for 2. See, Pierre was a real one. He wouldn't settle for any percenting electoral fraud. Bro was going for the platinum trophy. Now, his justification for this was that he was technically still on his first term, since the parliament voted him in 2005, not the people. He'd been president for 10 years, but was only the elected president for 5. He apparently had God to back him up on this too, with a spokesperson saying he, quote, believed he was president by divine will. But the public wasn't buying it. Apparently, facts, logic, and Jesus weren't enough to convince the people that his plan was constitutional, and protests broke out around the capital calling for him to step down. Now, normally I love a good loophole story, but I'm gonna have to side with the protesters on this one. The unrest escalated as both sides got more and more violent, and the situation turned into a full-on political crisis. It got so bad, in fact, that some military officials tried to overthrow the government while Nkurunziza was at a meeting in Tanzania. Ironically, he was actually meeting with other regional leaders to figure out how to fix the crisis. That must have been awkward. He expectably did not appreciate this act of blasphemy, and when he got back, he responded to it by purging the army of Tutsi soldiers and having suspected conspirators summarily executed. He also blamed the Rwandan government for starting the coup, because his own people couldn't possibly have wanted to force him out. The protests were getting worse too, and the government's crimes against humanity got ramped up accordingly. Instead of sticking with the Chinese approach and just shooting into the crowds, they added a more American flair to the response, reportedly sending arrested demonstrators to be tortured and sexually assaulted at intelligence service black sites. To be interrogated using enhanced techniques. Gotta make the distinction, there's a very big difference. Despite the mounting unrest, Nkurunziza continued doing the Lord's work, winning that year's election, which he shouldn't have been allowed to run in, with just under 74%. Like last time, he was almost uncontested, with most opposition candidates withdrawing over threats and fraud accusations. In case you missed it, both DDs in his party's name stand for Defense of Democracy. Just throwing that out there. In 2018, a sketchy referendum let him increase presidential terms from 5 years to 7, while reiterating the 2-term limit. Now, that might seem counterintuitive since he was, to him at least, already on his second term, and the extension wouldn't apply until after it was done, so he would have had to resign in 2020 regardless. But if the amendments weren't retroactive, then his term count would have reset, and he could have stayed in power until 2034. But Burundians didn't end up having to worry about that, since he announced he wouldn't be running in the next election, naming Evariste Ndayishimiye as the CNDD-FDD's new candidate. I guess God changed his mind. Then COVID hit a few months before the elections, and like he did with his eligibility for a third term, he let Jesus take the wheel. He refused to implement any kind of preventative measures, since he believed Burundi was under divine protection from the virus, and so any protocols would have been unnecessary. We don't have any reliable numbers since he kicked out all the WHO monitors, but given the conditions in the country and the prevalence of other diseases, it's safe to assume this wasn't a good idea. At least he wasn't waffling about 5G. Then, as expected, the CNDD-FDD won yet another almost uncontested election, marked by, you guessed it, fraud accusations, along with the arbitrary arrests of opposition members. Ndayishimiye came out with just over 71% and replaced Nkurunziza as president. Or did he? See, a lot of people called cap on Pierre's resignation, seeing it as all for show just to get the protesters to calm down. It seemed pretty suspicious that he would increase the term lengths for his successor, who he handpicked, and then just leave, leading some to believe that, in a roundabout way, his term count had reset, and he would stay in power for the next 14 years as Évariste's puppeteer. Maybe God hadn't changed his mind after all. Now, that sounds pretty likely, but we'll never know, since Nkurunziza died a few days after the election at the age of 55. His official cause of death was a heart attack, but some sources speculate it was actually COVID that killed him. I'm not even gonna say anything, the jokes write themselves. Alright, that's it. Hit the like if you like it, hit the dislike if you don't. Let me know in the comments who you want to see me cover in the next episode. Subscribe to see more when there's more to see, but until then, I'm out.